You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to Filmmaking Conversations with Damian Swaby.
Today on Filmmaking Conversations, I'll be speaking to Dan Attias. He has worked in the film and television industry since 1984. He has received the Directors Guild of America Award for Outstanding Direction of Dramatic Television for The Wire, and has been nominated for episodes of The Sopranos and many more fantastic TV shows. He has received Emmy Award nominations for his comedy direction on Entourage, and has taught acting and directing workshops in the United States of America, and has conducted masterclasses in Italy, Greece, Brazil, Mexico, and Canada. He has also mentored many young directors, several of whom have gone on to have successful careers in television. I had a fantastic time talking to Dan about his career and his new book, Directing Great Television Inside TV's New Golden Age. And you can find a link to buy the book in the show notes on this episode of Filmmaking Conversations with me, Damian Swaby. Dan, how are you today?
I'm very well, Damian. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
No problem at all. Thank you so much for coming on. And thank you so much for writing a book that I think all of us indie filmmakers should have at home to reference and read and think about on so many different levels, because we've all watched at least one of your shows, that's for sure. And we're definitely going to get into that. Some from when I was a young man up until now as an adult, I've watched. So it's an absolute pleasure for me to have you come on the show. That's for sure.
Thank you so much.
So Dan, give us a brief history of how you came to be a director.
Well, it's funny. I came to it relatively late. I didn't really know quite what I wanted to do all the way through college. I graduated with a degree in English literature. I had gotten accepted into a law school. I didn't really have my heart in that. And I decided not to start graduate school. I just wanted to kind of find myself. And what was interesting was I chose acting not because it was a career choice, but because it was a way to explore myself and free myself up a little bit emotionally and to play. And I really fell in love with that for about 3 years. I just took acting workshops, and then I really became committed to it. I fell in love with drama, which I had studied academically before, but there was something so invigorating about kind of, really freeing myself emotionally to kind of inform characters. But I also found that my talent seemed to really be far more awakened when I was in a film school, which for various reasons, I wound up in even while I wanted to be an actor. I had to make a film, and that process of just making it, in those days, it was on Super 8 film stock. Nowadays, it would be, for your listeners, just take your iPhone and just go make a film and, put it together and edit it and all that. And it just was really an epiphany for me, because I saw my skills were much better suited to being not so personally exposed as an actor has to be, and so emotionally available on call like that. I was much more activated when I could kind of respond to what an actor's performance is and kind of shape the story with the notes to the actor and the camera angles and all that, and particularly the editing process. When I found after when you put two pieces of film together, it sparks an emotional reaction in the viewer, and it just became, as I said, a kind of epiphany for me that this is what I want to do. So that set me on course. And then in terms of how I got started, I wound up, there is a program here in the United States offered by the Directors Guild of America, which trains assistant directors. And if you get through the gauntlet of the admissions process, you get assigned to projects as what they call a second assistant director or a trainee assistant director. And then if you put in about 1.5 years of work, then you get accepted into the guild. So I thought that would be a way to apprentice myself to good directors as I was, trying to develop myself. And it worked out really well. I wound up working on E.T., the Extraterrestrial, as a second assistant director. I worked on Airplane, the movie. I mean, some great, huge hits. As a trainee assistant director, I worked for Francis Coppola as a second assistant director on an obscure film of his called One from the Heart. And then I realized, rather than kind of pursue a course in production, I knew I wanted to be a director. So I went back to film school, made a short film, which I could then, use as my calling card. And that's kind of was my journey. That film got me first an agent, which is always helpful. I shouldn't say always helpful. A lot of people complain that they don't get enough help from the agent. This one actually had a relationship with Dino De Laurentiis, and he actually hired me for my first job, which was a feature film in 1985 called Stephen King's Silver Bullet. And that got me started. And my bread and butter shortly after became series television. And that's why I wrote the book, which you were kind enough to reference, which is called Directing Great Television: Inside TV's New Golden Age, because it coincided, my directing work in television coincided with the onset of that period, really. I had been directing TV for about 10 years before The Sopranos came around, and I was one of the very early directors of The Sopranos, and from there, was able to get a lot of wonderful opportunities on some great shows: The Wire, Deadwood, 6 Feet Under, and I've enjoyed my career ever since, and stayed working on some really great shows all the way through recently: Homeland and The Americans and The Boys and The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. So it's been a lot of fun.
A lot of fun and a lot of outstanding work, that's for sure. So tell us what it was like working on E.T.
Yeah, that was fantastic. It was filmed in 1982. Actually, it was filmed in the end of 1981. It was released in May of 82. And it was a funny time in the life of Steven Spielberg, because, he had burst on the scene with, fabulous success with Jaws and Raiders of the Lost Ark. But around the time of E.T., he had one of his only kind of career, what was perceived as a career setback. He had directed a movie called 1941, which was at that time lumped in as or a few other films that were regarded as kind of excessive, that young filmmakers were just wasting money and all that. Oh. So Stephen didn't like being painted with that broad brush and wanted to make a small film to show that he could do something small and it would be quality and he could work within a budget. So E.T. was actually always conceived as a little film with very little money to spend, a very tight budget. And that's how it was approached. So it was a very bare bones production. Most of the money was spent on the electronics and the design of E.T., but everything else was very minimally crude and staffed. And I was I don't know if your audience knows the distinction between first assistant director or second assistant director. As a second assistant director, which was my job, I was responsible for staging the background. Like I had a lot of fun staging the Halloween sequence when E.T. goes out, or all the kids kind of playing and all that. But also really helping the first assistant director run the set. You have to run around, make sure everybody knows what's happening, give the actors their times, make sure they come to the set when the camera is ready, letting them know when they aren't needed, alerting various departments what's coming up next. So special effects shot that can be prepared for before we get there, that kind of thing. But the experience itself was magical because nobody knew it was going to be a huge hit. I mean, that's always a hard thing to predict. But everybody knew it was of the highest quality. It was just such a moving experience. We were watching, this little boy, Henry Thomas, and Drew Barrymore, who was adorable. She was 6 years old, and it was very magical. We all knew it was a wonderful film, but like I say, nobody knew it was going to, become the biggest grossing movie of all time, which at the time it did.
And how would you say that experience was different than working for Francis Ford Coppola?
Every show is different. And one of the things that makes it that way, in addition to the nature of the script the nature of the shooting circumstances. Also, the director really helps define what set operations are like. That's one of the things I write about in my book, that one of the things you have to take responsibility for in any kind of directing. I don't make a huge distinction between directing series television and directing features, directing anything. There are significant differences, and we can discuss them if you'd like. But there are also many more things that are identical in all those jobs. I mean, as the director, you are responsible for staging the scene, for giving notes to the actors, to defining what the story is really about, to communicating with all the departments, to having a vision for what the story is, for being the one person on the set who is responsible to be monitoring moment to moment what is happening in the storytelling. What is being communicated by this particular choice? Not just the actors' choices, but everything, the lighting effects, the kind of set decoration there is, the props that are being used. All of these things really are approved by the director, and the various departments who have direct responsibility for creating them really do far better when they get guidance from the director, when it's not just a hodgepodge. The director has to have the vision. So that's something that's very similar between any kind of directing. But to your question, is like every show in some way has the personality of the director. And you couldn't find two people probably more different from one another than Francis Coppola and Steven Spielberg. They're just, the one thing they share is enormous talent. But personality-wise, they're completely different. So, Francis, is a big, jovial Italian, lover of food and music, and the set was I would say far more kind of bohemian in a certain way. And Stephen is brilliant and sharp-minded and knows what he wants and is very precise. And so it's a kind of different vibe.
And in your book, you mentioned directing TV after directing a feature film. Mm-hmm. So what was it like for you directing an episode of Miami Vice?
Well, that's, when I got into this world as director, my vision was I wanted to be a feature director. This was, I came of age, I was a huge fan of the films of the 70s, the independent cinema, and, aspired to do that. My first job was the feature, the Stephen King feature, Silver Bullet. Horror is not my first choice of movies. I mean, I was a Francois Truffaut fan and Arthur Penn and those independent filmmakers. The horror genre was something which frankly was, and probably to some extent still is, it was kind of the easiest avenue in, because they make a lot of horror films at the time. They did, and I'm sure they still do. And I thought I would, continue trying to get features, but but what happened was I got offered more horror films, and I didn't want to do more horror films, so I turned down stuff like that, thinking I'd develop or whatever. Had a few development deals that kind of didn't happen. Anyway, all that kind of uncertainty there, a few opportunities came to direct television, and it was interesting because in the mid-'80s, television was just kind of regarded as kind of the poor stepsister. It's like wasn't really regarded as a great creative form and all that kind of thing. And I didn't really think that's would be where I'd land. The surprise for me, as I think I write in my book, is I really found my creative voice through directing television. And much of that is because the quality of television really vastly improved, to the point that many people prefer, having 12, 15, 30 hours of storytelling time to develop something, and having been freed from the network need for commercial breaks and, cliffhangers every 10 minutes to bring people back from commercials and all that. But to your point about Miami Vice, that was interesting because my early days of television directing, and Vice was, I think, my second job in a TV show. That was really, that was kind of a huge hit of the day. And it was a big, I felt it was a feather in my cap to have gotten it. But what was funny about that is, they fancied themselves, we only hire feature directors, we don't hire TV directors. And so because I had done one job, a feature film, they said, okay, Dan's a feature director. So he's, and the skills required to direct a television show, in addition to having a lot that's very similar to directing features, there's a lot that is in some ways very much more demanding because you have far less time to get ready. You have far less time to shoot. People pepper you with questions that need the correct answer, because if you make the wrong answer and something has to be reshot, it upsets the whole schedule going forward. I mean, there's all kinds of additional pressures. And Vice had its own pressures, which was it was the cool kid. It was the cool kids. They thought they were all the cool kids doing it. So there's all kind of pressure to be really cool and smart. But there was also the element that everybody was desperate to please Michael Mann, who had created the show. And he wasn't around very much. So that was funny because, created a very dysfunctional arrangement because he had to approve everything, but he was off trying to develop features. And sometimes decisions were made, he would overturn them at the last minute when he'd hear about it. And a lot of people were looking to blame everybody else. Oh, that wasn't my decision. They made that decision or something. And I was new. And frankly, it was one of the most difficult and valuable experiences I had, because I really felt like I got hit upside the head doing the show, because I didn't really know how much I didn't know about directing. And I kind of was I wouldn't even admit it to myself. And I was kind of in the position of kind of presenting I felt I kind of had to act like the director who knew, when I didn't. I should have been asking for help, and I should have been, but it wasn't just me. There was also that particular situation was difficult. There were a lot of knives out, I think, in that kind of situation. And we had a few interesting miscommunications and all that. And the one thing that really was difficult for me, but it was valuable in that it really course corrected me for my later jobs, is I wasn't sufficiently prepared. And then television really, really need to be prepared. You can't just say, well, we'll figure it out on the day. You have to have a plan, which is not to say you shouldn't be flexible. And as I've done this now for decades, I find that the more prepared I am, the more open I am to changes, because I'm so seeped in story that when someone proposes something, I can see the ramifications very quickly to how it's going to affect 12 other things I've been trying to solve in terms of the storytelling. If it's disruptive and it's going to upset that, I know that too. But if it's a better idea than something I had confronted in my imagination during prep, I think that's fantastic, and I can incorporate it. And that's the way I like to work. I like to collaborate, and for people to feel invited to share their creativity, because we all, it's like, we're all going to look good if the project's good. And it's silly to, it's a mark of immaturity to have to be the one that takes credit for everything and all that. And you dissuade the enthusiasm of your collaborators. It's like, well, I'm not going to suggest something that this person thinks they know everything. But at that early stage, I was kind of fearful of coming off as not knowing something. I felt that would really betray that I didn't belong. And so I would have and I also didn't fully, of course I didn't, because I was just starting out. I didn't really feel comfortable with visual storytelling, visual language. It's like, it can be very intimidating when you start out knowing how you're going to cover a scene. You can imagine staging. Okay. And I had a lot of experience with that because I'd been an actor for 3 years, and on stage primarily. I didn't take it on into the film world before I realized I wanted to shift course. But what I wasn't familiar with was what angles was required. I hadn't had experience editing. What angles would be required. I did for my one feature, of course, but to tell the story well. And when, as you probably know, Damien, in your experiences as well, that when blocking shifts, that changes a lot of things. The angles that you might have thought that were going to lead to a climactic moment where you wanted a specific image. Well, if that gets upset because the staging changes, nowadays, to me, I feel fine figuring things out quickly because I know. But in those days, starting out, you don't. And what was difficult on that show was my decisions. I was new. I came up with kind of some basic solutions. But Don Johnson, who was the star of Miami Vice, and at that time was known as the King of Miami, he was like the coolest guy around. He totally ran the set. And I just felt like I was run over. by a Mack truck, because it's like, because that's the other interesting, fascinating thing to me, really, about being a series television director is you're coming on, I mean, unless you're a producer, which I've been also on some series, and you're kind of there for the whole run. When you're really the guest director, which is mostly the case for most directors who work in series television, you and your audience, I'm sure, have noticed that in a lot of your favorite series, you see a different name as the director every week, maybe a couple of repeats, but that role changes a lot. You're coming in as kind of the temporary person. Everybody else is permanent, knows each other, and you're coming in and you're the boss, you're the leader, and they may have just met you. And it's like, so there's all of these issues about, which I write about in my book too, how interesting and challenging a situation this is, because you got to develop trust very quickly, because there's not time. You're going to give, for example, an actor a note on how this character, how you want this character to play a scene, and they have to trust that you know anything at all about the show or anything about them. So it's very challenging. And Don Johnson would really just kind of, and plus Don was, and probably still is, he's a talented filmmaker in his own right. He had done some directing, and he and the cameraman had a relationship. And here I was coming in on I think it was third season, and they were already the hottest thing in American television. And I'd say, well, how about we do it this way? And he would say, well, I don't know. Wouldn't it be better if we do this? I think it'd be better if we do this. And he'd start talking to the cameraman, and they'd come up with a big plan. And I'd just be kind of, whoa, my head was exploding. I didn't want to be regarded as not having authority. I didn't want to abdicate. But the problem for me was that I saw the solutions were better. That it's like, they understand the process more than me. So it led to a great sapping of my confidence, but I wanted the show to be good above all. And it wound up being a good show, but I learned the importance of taking responsibility for the storytelling. Really, the main thing I learned is really to focus and prep to really exploring the story in as much depth as possible, really, really coming up with defining what the story is. That's something that I think does not get discussed enough when people are discussing directing. I think, the good directors understand this, that, the story isn't just what happens. The story is the meaning about what happens, where you want to direct the audience's attention about what is at issue, what is at stake. It's not just, scripts. The best scripts don't spell it out for you. The best scripts, have what is referred to as subtext that's interesting. I mean, it's like, like a dialogue between characters, Everybody will know, I think, from their own personal lives, that when you're with your significant other or with or in a highly charged situation, like a job interview or whatever it might be, you very rarely speak your truth. You have an inner motivation, an inner intention, but you're not safe to come out with exactly what you're feeling. You're kind of guarding that. And when can I release some of that? And you may not even be conscious of it, even as it's motivating you. And the best drama and the best writing replicates that, creates that. And it's also the way actors can get in touch with their own deeper resources. The Miami Vice experience was shattering in a way. I'd gotten this job, and producers weren't happy with me, and part of it was my fault and part of it wasn't. Part of it was everybody looking for cover, because the show turned out fine, but I was very dispirited, and finally I got a second chance at a show a few months later, because the references weren't great on that one. But it took me, I don't know, several months later before I got another job. And in that one, I was determined, because of the previous experience, as I say, to really immerse myself in the story. And here's another thing that is very fundamental to, I think, to my process and to what I think it ought to be really for anybody directing, is in any project I have to find a way to define the story in a way I personally can invest in and can care about. Because if I don't care about the story I'm telling, I don't think I can make anybody else care about it. So I'm always looking for what is really going on in a deeper way between these characters, or what is this character's real goal in life, not just to get the girl or not just to get the job or whatever else. What are the bigger issues in their lives that we all have in some way, the best scripts do kind of give you a sense of what it is, but often it's not even spelled out, but it's your job as the director, I find, and actors, but the director has to be the one that's monitoring that, or that can assist the actor in finding a deeper way to play something, a deeper way to think about something as they're playing it. Has to find something you really care about. So on my next job, I spent a lot of time. I realized, I have to give up this pose of like, I'm cool. I'm a director. I'm here. Of course I'm a director and I deserve to be here. I said, no, I have to admit what I didn't know. And I actually told the producers, I said, I'd love to get on the sound stages, on the sets, on the weekends when you close. I just want time to just sit on these sets and just figure out how I see these scenes. And, I thought it kind of exposed me as being a neophyte, but I said, the bottom line is when people show up, I don't want to go through that experience I just did on Miami Vice, where there's questions and I don't know the answers and I'm flustered. I wanted to fully commit to exploring every nuance, every detail I possibly could about the story, and particularly developing a visual plan. That was really important. So I just camped out on sets at nights and the weekend when there was nobody there asking me questions. This is during the prep period. And I just imagined, I dreamt the story, I imagined it. I really got, I started to think, what angles interest me? What staging? And I also would think about my staging, as I do also. That's a whole other complicated subject, another chapter in the book too, but it's like, staging, just the short answer, just a short story about that is just that I feel always I need to have a staging in mind before I approach any scene with actors, but my goal is for the actors to have the experience of finding it for themselves. I don't want to impose it because an actor may have a better idea. So I like, in rehearsal, there's not a lot of time for rehearsal in episodic television. So it has to be, it's a very, telescoped, condensed process, but, we'll run the lines, the actors will do some, where they kind of find they move, where they kind of feel like it. And often, often they'll find the very same things I have imagined because it should come out of intention and all that kind of thing. But if they haven't, I'll suggest it. And I won't just suggest it like you go there when that happens. I'll explain it in terms of why. Why this particular action makes sense in terms of that character's motivation. If a character, for example, is hiding something from another character, they might be walking away from them as they're saying something to go pour a cup of coffee so that they can have a private moment. So they're thinking about how they're going to, how do I answer that challenge this person just threw me? Giving physical representations to what the inner conflicts are. It both helps the audience to understand what's going on, but it also helps the actor's performance because where the body goes, the heart and mind follow. And it activates. And a physical action can actually produce an emotional affect. And so you kind of, figure out what, the other thing I'll say, I'm throwing in the kitchen sink here, but it's a big subject to me too, is the other thing for me that I learned and I brought to bear on this when I was camping out on this second job set. The fundamental question, a fundamental question that I feel applies to almost every directing choice and decision I have to make is simply, how does this make me feel? How does this make me feel? It's like, it's not so much a process. One thinks about it, you got to figure stuff out. But before I can figure anything out, I have to get in touch with my own instincts, feelings that I don't choose, that just happen within me. So when I would camp out on the set, this was one of the big things I cultivated when I was doing this, is as I would try out a staging idea in my imagination, or imagine where I want the lens to be, to frame what kind of background I would have the actor in this particular moment, which gives visual cues to the audience. It's like I'd always ask the question, how would that make me feel? How does this make me feel? And I just say, well, I have this association, or it's like, it's not, and only because how I feel is likely how the audience is going to feel. And it's like, so, and that's what informs me. Instead of trying to figure out how an audience might react, the only way I can really know that in any meaningful way is how I react. And I can only tell my truth in a way that I think I can only present what feels to me truthful, and then and hope that the audience, and can rely that the audience would feel the same way. So the staging, your question was specifically, remind me again about what?
The visual imagery. How did you go through that all on the soundstage over that weekend?
Yeah, I would just kind of see what images appealed to me for the story element, like what background would help us make the right associations to the character that was being photographed. Because it's interesting, it's funny, as opposed to life, film language is often, it's more oriented in many ways to how the audience will experience something as opposed to how the actors or the characters will experience. Like, for example, if you have a scene between two characters, one of whom is an introvert and doesn't like stimulation, and the other is loves socializing, loves stimulation, and they're having a conversation. This is just I'm just pulling this out as a hypothetical. And you have them sit down at a table, say in a restaurant. Well, I think in reality, what I would do is the person who doesn't like stimulation, I would put with their back to the wall so that my shot on that person would see a blank wall. Like, suddenly you'd be where you see me, or it's like, so there's very little stimulating happening in the frame when you're looking at that character. The other character who enjoys stimulation, I might put facing the wall so that when you photograph that person, there's all this life behind them. The bar is going on, the party is going on, and that character is talking to the one with the bare wall behind them. That, I think, enables the audience to make associations with the characters when they see them. Oh, there's a lot of life around the character who likes socializing, and there's very little behind the character who doesn't. And the interesting thing is, in real life, it would be opposite, because the one who doesn't like stimulation would be wanting to look at that blank wall, and the one who likes stimulation would be sitting by the wall so they could look out onto all that. So that's a kind of sweet example of, you don't always just do what an actor wants to do. It's like you have to be mindful of what's being communicated to the audience, and actors generally will understand that. But it's the most important thing is what's getting communicated.
Completely. And the experience on Beauty and the Beast for the episode you done called Labyrinth.
Yeah, that was the second. Yeah, towards Labyrinth. Yes, Beauty and the Beast. I don't think we'd mentioned that. That was the second job I did after Miami Vice. That's where I really decided I'm going to really take responsibility. I'm going to know the story in and out so that when someone confronts me on the set or has a different idea, I'm going to either be able to say yes because I fully understand the story enough to know that improves things, or say, no, I've really thought of a different way for this reason because it serves the story. And that's kind of thing. Yeah.
So at the end of it, did the producers or the showrunner have anything important or something that you held dearly?
Well, it's fine. I think you may be referencing this because those are the two examples in that second chapter in my book where those are the two toughest examples, probably, if not in my career, they're certainly right up there. I had two very difficult jobs starting my career that might have derailed me, but actually turned out to be very valuable experiences. The first was the Miami Vice I described. Then this show happened, the Beauty and the Beast, and that was really very strange experience because I really, as I said, found my voice. I found how I wanted to work, and I started shooting it, and it went miraculously well. I mean, everybody was, oh my God, this footage is beautiful. The performances are fantastic, and they were really puffing me up with praise, and I was feeling great. And suddenly, when the show was nearly done, I felt a shift in the force, and something had happened, and they had gotten furious about something, which was. It's too difficult to explain, but it was a very erratic kind of decision response from the showrunner. And that's another thing in television that you are not, as opposed to features, features generally it's more the director is king or queen. Television, you're really serving the showrunner in a certain way. You can't really tell your story, even though I always feel I've made it my story in the telling, but that has to serve the vision of the showrunner. You can't just go off and make the story about something that does not serve where they want the story to head. You can enrich it. You can find some wrinkle or twist that is your own hook to it that can, as I said, find the thing that you're going to care about. But you can't change the basic motivations of the characters. You can't do all that kind of stuff. And this particular producer just made a 180, what we had agreed on going in, the story was going to be about. He suddenly, in my view anyway, got terrified that it was too big of a departure from what his audience maybe expected. I didn't agree, but I certainly, if had he expressed that at the time, I would have been happy to shift it. But he had agreed to what we were going to do, and suddenly he got very nervous about it, and it was to me, very strange behavior. And we left on a second straight show, which ended terribly in terms of the producer's attitude towards me. So it was, and especially what was particularly difficult about that is, for 3/4 of the show, they were calling me. They wanted me to direct the most important episode. We're going to cancel these other directors. We want you to do. You're the best director. This is incredible. Can you do this? Can you do this? And suddenly they just pulled the rug out. Oh, sorry, we didn't mean any of it. It was very traumatic for me. And then so now I had, over the period of about 6 months, I'd had 2 jobs, both of which, if anybody called them for references, were not going to be good. And so I didn't quite know what to do. I was thinking, well, what else could I do for a living? And but I did finally get a job, not too long, maybe 4 or 5 months later. And it was interesting because the showrunner of that show had been a writer in the room for Beauty and the Beast. And he said, I've had very similar experiences with this guy, his complete shifts, his, frankly, acting. He had acted what this writer felt was abusively towards him, which is, was my experience. And he said, I don't worry about anything he says, because, I'd like you to come on. So I started doing that show. That didn't last it was a short-lived show. It's called Wolf. And but I had learned so much from the experience of Beauty and the Beast. I had found my voice. I had found the way I was going to work. And it was so exciting and exhilarating and collaborative with other, and I brought those same lessons and skills into this new job. And lo and behold, second or third day, the dailies start coming in, and I got the same enthusiastic calls from the producers. Oh my God, this footage is the most fantastic. It's so great. You're doing so great. And I found myself listening to this message where they were saying this, and I found myself saying to myself, boy, am I glad I had that experience on Beauty and the Beast, because I know now not to take any of that seriously. That could change in a heartbeat. And I caught myself. I said, wow, did I just say I was glad I had the experience on Beauty and the Beast? This was this thing that had kept me up at night. I felt, and I realized, no, I learned a terribly important lesson there, which is, that you really have to trust yourself. You have to not let yourself be puffed up by anybody's good opinion or bad opinion. Just keep doing your work. Try not to be, confrontational unnecessarily. But just keep your head down and keep trusting your own instincts, and try not to get too puffed up by praise, and also not too, chagrined or, from people not liking it. So that was really, really got me started in terms of also realizing every showrunner is different. They're just people. They're not kings. They're not, they're just human beings, and every human being is different. And, the important thing for me ultimately is just to keep serving the story, keep telling the story as best as I can.
So when you're going through those type of issues and those type of problems, how do you deal with managing your inner status?
Well, very good question. Another chapter in my book, towards the end, I have a chapter called Inner States. And it's like, one thing that really doesn't get discussed very much in directing. I haven't read a lot of books about directing. There frankly aren't that many good ones. I think the best one is probably that I read is Sidney Lumet's book, Making Movies. But what is rarely discussed, and I also don't, it's another reason I don't regard my book as a how-to book. I don't think you can give someone like, this is what you do, and then you do this, and then you do this, and you make a good show. What directing really involves to me is accessing yourself. And that's a challenge in life too. Getting to know who you are, getting not exactly control over yourself, but in certain sense control, but getting friendly with yourself, understanding that you are your own best resource. So that, like this point I made earlier about asking, how does this make me feel? It's like, instead of asking someone else, was that a good performance? How did it feel to me? Was I moved by that? I was moved on that part of it, not so much on this. Why not? What didn't move me about that particular part of the scene, the two actors going on? Well, my interest was waning for that whole, 30 seconds of dialogue until they got somewhere else. And that was interesting. So where my interest is waning, I said, okay, that's the place I got to dig deeper. How can I make those exchanges muscular and interesting and something happening between them? And so it all comes from checking your own interest, checking inside yourself. So the first thing is, in response to that, is you really, as a director, trying to get in touch with your own feelings, in touch with, what your perception of truth is. And that can be assaulted in 100 ways when you're directing, because people are just coming at you all the time. What do we do about this? What do you do this? When do you want to do this? So you can get overwhelmed by this onslaught. It's easy to get out of yourself when you're in a position of leadership on a set. So I've had in my own life, I've been greatly benefited by a meditation practice. I've done one for years and years, which isn't a magic pill, but it's like, at least it gets you used to slowing down and checking in with yourself. And becoming, the big term nowadays is mindfulness, but it's a good term, because it's like, if you can be mindful of what is happening both inside of yourself, what's happening now, bodily things that are happening that your body might be trying to communicate something to you, stress or happiness or whatever it might be, but also mindful of what's happening in your environment, so that you're kind of aware that, hey, that dolly grip is offended by the way I just approached him about something. I think I was probably a little sharp when I complained about how the last shot didn't work. And I can sense he probably feels offended, and that's not good. I've got to go over and apologize or make some sort of, way to heal that over, because I don't want him to be holding a grudge. You just got to be mindful of the set and everybody around you. So that kind of inner quality is important to cultivate. Another one is you have to be willing to assume the mantle of leadership. A lot of people, I think, I don't know how many people, but I think when you come on the set as the director, you are the leader. You are the one that people are looking to for answers. And you're also probably, almost certainly, a projection screen for a lot of people who, have issues or interests in authority. It's like you're the authority, and people are not just going to relate to you as Dan or Damien. They're going to, who knows, they may be relating to you like their father that they had some issue with. I mean, it's like, or a professor that, it's like, so you got to own the fact that when you accept this position, you are a lightning rod for a lot of people are looking to you, and you have to therefore be extremely mindful of how you behave, and how it's like a sharp word isn't just coming like between friends. It's like, oh my goodness, coming from somebody who can confer praise or not, and it's like, gee, is my job at risk? I mean, it can. So you have to be very mindful of always the fact that you're in this position of leadership, and I think you have to own it. You have to take responsibility for it, and not. I mean, like there are times set can be so overwhelming, you might want to just run away and hide. Oh my God, I don't have the answer. I don't know what. It's all right to have those feelings. We all do, but it's important not to give in to them. I mean, you have to say, okay, no one else is going to solve this but me. I mean, the worst thing on a set happens when a director is lost and gives up. And then there's this void, and it's like, there are other departments that come in and people have ideas and all that, but you lose your authority, and everybody else loses the sense that you're still holding the rudder of the ship. I mean, I will admit when fortunately it's not too many times that I'm at a total loss for how to proceed, but I try not to deny those things. Sometimes there's an element you got to fake it a little bit, but at some point you can't, because everybody sees, some mishap might have happened. An actor is just hopelessly lost, or you've been cut short 2 hours from your day, and you just have to figure out a shorter way to do something. And it's very challenging. I mean, there are a lot of situations that can be challenging. So, to me, my goal for myself in those situations is to stay present. Don't pretend I know more than I do, but stay committed to finding an answer, and also be willing to enlist advice and help, but not in a kind of abdication. Just like you have to hold responsibility for, you're going to be the one who's going to make the ultimate decision here, and not just hope somebody rescues you. So that's another quality. And then amid all the stresses thrown at you, you have to find that still place within yourself to be able to really assess correctly, what's the best solution here? To me, sometimes the image comes of diving below storm-driven seas, and you get below tumultuous waves and you get down below a little bit, it's very calm, and you're looking up at the surface and everything's happening up there, but it's calm here. So if you can just find that for just a moment, maybe the right answer will come.
So has there ever been a time or an occasion when you yourself have looked at a script and realized internally there's a personal struggle that you are going to relate to in this script? And if you have had that situation, how would you deal with that?
Well, that's a fascinating subject. I'm always interested in when I get a script, I try to read it and just let it wash over me. I'll read it without first hoping I'm not going to get distracted by, how will I do that? Where would I do that? Just read the story and let it just wash over me, because I want that audience experience myself of finding, okay, what interests me about this story? What confuses me about this story? Where does my curiosity go? What detail piqued my interest? Because that's my starting point, my way in. It's and so I'll be, that detail is interesting. I don't know why, but that relationship between that mother and son, that little exchange, it sparked something in me. And I'll go, why? What was it about that? So I'll do my own analysis. So I'm bringing myself to the project. Now, if it touches on something that's a very meaningful conflict or aspiration of my own, generally I'm very happy about that, because that's a strength. I know I'm going to care about this story. I know I'm going to be really invested in exploring this truthfully, and maybe learn something myself about, how these characters are going to navigate through, because I'm probably consulting with my own feelings and all that. So generally it's a tremendous asset when that kind of thing happens. What gets challenging is when you don't know your own story. See, that's what's interesting. Self-knowledge is so important, I think, in directing, because the better you know yourself, the more you're able to recognize exactly what you say. It's well, you know what? There's a lot that moves me in this story from my own personal life. Say it's about, thankfully I've been married for many decades very happily, but say I was divorced or something, and then the story, and it was, say, a very acrimonious divorce. And suddenly in this story I'm reading, there's a divorce which is kind of going pretty well. I might want to be, I might want to make it, let's make it not so good, because I'm more interested in that. It's like when I'd be changing the story. That's not what that story wants to be. And if I'm not conscious of the fact that this other thing in my life is nipping at my heels, it's not appropriate to this story, it may seep in, and it may distort how I see, this story. So by knowing it, I can say, okay, I see, I got to put that aside, what's happening in my life. And as I started to say, when you can make connections in your life, often it's something you want to bring in because it can really assist. But there are times when your own connections in life are not appropriate to this story. You shouldn't make a story about something that's unresolved in your life. And those times you got to, okay, that's not what this story is. So I'm going to put that aside, and I'm going to start treating what this story really is. So it's just fascinating to me that you really need to first explore what's meaningful to you, and then see what from your own experience is appropriate to bring to bear on this story and what isn't.
And you've had many scripts handed to you, obviously, over the years. And you said yourself the most exciting script you had was for an episode of Homeland.
Yeah, that was a great. I did several of Homeland over the years, and one was a spectacular script, and I think turned into a great show, which was in the fourth season. There was an episode when the American embassy is overrun in Pakistan, and it was a very climactic episode. A beloved character was killed by a terrorist, and so many things happened, and it was a real watershed episode. You know, when I get a great script like that, I just want to do it justice and wring every possible moment out of it that's there. And so it was, you know, to me, what was so brilliant about the script and so fast, such a fun experience to direct, is it was so many things. It was a war movie because you started with Carrie Matheson and Mandy Patinkin's character, you know, getting pinned down in a firefight, and, you know, we shot it in Warframe ways. I think, you know, if you have the 90-degree shutter, some of your audience might know that.
Yeah, I noticed that. I loved it.
And handheld stuff. So it was like, you know, I was making a little war movie, and then I had like another sequence while that's happening. You know, the terrorist Haqqani is bringing his people in and storming into the consulate and machine gunning people. And so there was a kind of like just thriller horror kind of slaughter happening. And there was that moment. And then there was the character Max is the woman he loves is this Muslim woman who works for the CIA, and she is held captive. And so it's a love story. And then that's character tragically dies, so there's that grief that happens, and then there's these quiet moments after the carnage where you just have all this deep inner reflection and characters having to plumb the depths of deep silences and depth of pain. And to me, one of my favorite scenes was two characters who weren't really even series regulars. It's funny, Alex Ganza, who created the show and was one of the two showrunners, he said this was his favorite scene of the whole season. It happened between the woman who ran the American embassy and her husband, who betrayed, you know, who was the one who gave the terrorists access to the compound. He's now in jail, and there was just a scene between these two characters who were not critical characters in the life of the show, but there was a scene that was as quiet and as riveting and as compelling, ultimately, when it was put together, in my view anyway, as any scene in Homeland. It was just where, you know, she approaches the scene like just hating him. She found that he had betrayed her, and his actions had resulted in scores of people dying, and what would it mean for her career, and what would it mean for their marriage, which was obviously over, and they had a teenage son. So she was summoned to his jail cell, and she's just dripping with hatred and contempt, and he has to somehow make amends, and is asking her to give him a way out, which he thought would be honorable, which was to give him a belt so that he could commit suicide in the jail cell. And it's like, it's an amazing turn, because in a very short time, you know, scenes can only last, 3-4 minutes, maybe. We had to believe this woman would actually do it. And it was such a challenging and difficult and wonderful rehearsal that we worked on it to get it to a place where I believed it credibly happened. You believed this turn, you believed, you know, and it was an amazing, amazing scene. And then the great payoff is the next day, after she thinks he's saving her the pain and turmoil of having a prolonged trial, that he's going to do the right thing, in her view, end his own life and end this chapter of her life. She shows up the next morning waiting to hear, okay, oh my goodness, they found your husband hung himself in the cell, and she found out, no, he chickened out.
And that's when my jaw dropped when I saw that.
Yeah. It's like, you know, it's like after she's made the most difficult decision in her whole life to assist in a suicide of her husband and father of her teenage son, and it's just like was taken through the emotional ringer of having to go through making that decision. And he was totally committed to it. That actor had to, you know, we had to believe he had to be so raw and exposed and truly contrite that she would really believe him, and we would believe him. And then to find out, when it came right down to it, I really couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It was like, so all these incredible moments, shifts in tone, it just had everything. So So for me, it was just great fun because, another way I think about episodic direct storytelling, any kind of directing, is it's like you're kind of holding a thread between two hands. It's kind of spooling through. And it's like you as the director, as the storyteller, are deciding, okay, when do I pull that taut for tension? When do I let it slacken a little bit? It's like for the audience's experience. I mean, for their own inner experience. When do I give them a rest? Oh my goodness, that just happened. When do I set them up for the next pulling of a taut? It was so lovely that way because it just went mountains to valleys to middle. And so it just had a fantastic inner rhythm. And that's the kind of thing, you develop a sense for during your prep period and during your shooting. And that's the thing the director has to watch. I mean, it was all written, of course, but the script in so many ways is lifeless. It's just words on a page. You have to interpret it. You have to give flesh to it. You have to be the judge as it's being performed. Did it really land at that moment? I know the words said that character felt something, but did we feel it? And where there were no words where something was being felt, did I get a depth of experience from that actor? Did I really feel it so that the audience would feel where I need them to be to set up the next moment? All those are the kind of questions as a director you should be asking yourself constantly.
Completely. I completely understand and agree with you. And the episode itself and the show, from what I've seen, they honestly really do feel like movies within a series rather than a television series as we see them.
Well, that's the new golden age of television. I mean, I think that's true. Really, I was fortunate that I had directed enough television around the time that The Sopranos started that I was asked to do. I had worked with the creator of The Sopranos, David Chase, on another show I loved. It's called Northern Exposure. I don't know if any of your audience has seen it, but that was a great show. But David, I was very happy that he called me. He directed the pilot of The Sopranos, and they weren't sure it was going to go to a series, and they decided finally it would, like 9 months after they had made the pilot. And I got a call from David Chase asking if I would do the first episode. Really, the second episode after the pilot, but it was like the first episode of starting up in earnest. Now we're making a season. And The Sopranos really was the game changer because it first of all, high-end cable really didn't exist then. HBO had been around for a little while, but it hadn't really made its mark. The Sopranos was like, oh my God, first of all, it wasn't subject to all the, the ways networks won't show swearing or nudity or anything like that. Also, you have to have commercials every 10 minutes. HBO didn't. It was like a straight hour. It was like a movie, and you could be as adult as you wanted, and because they didn't have to appeal to the lowest common denominator to get the widest number of people watching. It was just the subscribers. It was just a niche audience. So you could just appeal to some kind of smart, sophisticated viewers. Let's do it for them instead of doing the Love Boat for the masses. And that really began to change. And then other shows, that I was very fortunate to direct: Deadwood, 6 Feet Under, The Wire, similarly. And you're absolutely right. I approach every job like it's a feature. It's an hour, but I think audiences expect it now. I mean, you look to these high-end shows to have, and I think in many ways, a lot of people have said, the quality of features is not as, for the most part, with, some obvious, wonderful examples of brilliant features being made, but for the most part, the quality of features does not match up to a lot of the quality of the higher end shows. So, and I think that's also partly due to the fact that these shows have the advantage over features of having a much broader canvas in terms of time to tell a story. Yeah.
So you worked with some difficult actors. And I imagine the actors in Homeland for 13 Hours of Istanbul were really a joy to work with. But there's one character in your book called Max. Tell us about Max and what it was like to work with him.
Yeah, and I've used a pseudonym because this is a very well-known actor and a brilliant actor, and I like him very much. And I don't even know if he'd be offended by this. I don't think he would at all. But since when I tell the story, I think your audience will say. But it was. I had taken the job partly because he was in it, because I was just a huge fan of his. That's another thing. I choose my jobs because I really like being able to grow myself through the jobs. It's like one of the, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but one of the things I've loved in my experience of directing episodic television is not all series directors are fortunate as I have been to be able to do so many different genres. I do comedy as well as drama, and I did and wacky shows like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which I was involved with at the onset of that, and comedies like Entourage, but also serious dramas like I've talked about here too. And I love that because each show is its own world. And what I love about it is it's similar to what drew me to acting. It's like, every role is a new whole sensibility you have to get in. And to me, each show, particularly when you do different genres and all that, each show has its own visual language, its own tonal language, its own sensibility. And for me to tell a story, to come in and tell a little slice of it, I have to fully immerse in that and learn it so well. To me, how I think about it is it's like learning a new language so you can speak it in your own voice, not mimic it, make it a part of you. And now I'll bring myself to it. Now, using all these ways of expressing and ways of thinking sensibility-wise and tonal, how do I express myself within that? And that's when I think you do well directing a show. Instead of, you're not mimicking, you're still coming from yourself, but you've absorbed this new rule. So in this particular case, it was a strange and interesting world I would be entering. But the main reason I wanted to work with him or do the show, was the chance to work with this just virtuoso, amazing actor who had moved me in so many performances. But he was also his acting roles could be very intimidating. He played that part really, really well. And so I came on the set, and it's funny, when you're directing a series, you come in and you're doing your preparation while the previous episode is being filmed. And then when that's done, you've done your preparation, and then you come in and you're directing while the director for the next episode is prepping his or her show while, so it's like, so I was there doing my prep while they were shooting, and I made it a point, as I like to do, to introduce myself to the key players before I get on the set, essentially telling them what to do. It's like, I like to have a relationship, and I should say that that's not my goal to tell people what to do. My goal is to enlist their collaboration and let them, and hopefully they emerge feeling it was a collaboration, but enough said about that. So I introduced myself to Max, and I don't know, something about the way he was. He was so, he could be so calm and kind of, I don't know, it's like he would just look, I just felt like he was looking right through me. I don't know if it was where he was on the day and the scene he was doing, but he has this ability. It's like, it can be scary when you watch it, or unnerving. It's like when you feel, I don't know if I have any connection with this person, just looking at me like, and so I was very self-conscious. Everything I was, it's the kind of thing when you leave and think, what did I say? Oh, that was terrible. He must think I'm a jerk. Or, I was thinking all that stuff. So I didn't feel personally more comfortable having made that introduction. Hopefully he was, but I wouldn't know that. So we get to our very first day of shooting, and it was a scene that I was excited to see what he was going to do about it. I just had an intuitive take on how it should work. And I won't get into all the details, but we did a rehearsal, and I thought it was terrible. I thought he was not even in the scene. I thought, what's happening? It's like he's just kind of saying lines in a very surface level. And to me, it was rich with subtext. And I think your audience knows what I mean by that by now. It's like that his motives were much darker and twisted, and it was manipulative. He didn't play any of that. He just played a guy saying his lines and was going to walk out of the room. and it's like, I'm thinking, my God, this is Max. This is like this amazing actor who I was really self-conscious to, and felt like an idiot when I tried to say 2 words to him. Like, you must think he must not have a good opinion of me and all that. But his performance is terrible. And I think, okay, chill. It's just a rehearsal. This is something you have to learn as a director too. Don't overreact on a read through. Because a lot of that, I said, okay, maybe he's saving it. It was just kind of setting up the scene, and we'll light the scene and we'll bring him in and he'll do the master angle. And, I don't want to that would be terrible if I went up and commented and he'd look at me and say, what, you think I was acting then? I wasn't acting then. Don't give me a note on that. And I said, okay, I'll just chill. And we light the scene and we come back, we roll cameras, and my God, he does it the identical same way. It's just like boring, slow, terrible. Now you know why I don't want to say the guy's name. I mean, I think, because he's a great actor, Yeah. But every actor makes choices that, it's a process. You find the role. So now I'm thinking, okay, now I've got to say something, because that's the other thing as a director. It's funny, on that show I had heard, after this story I'm going to tell you, I had heard that, anyway, I won't get ahead of the story. So I'm thinking, how am I going to say this to him? Because my feelings were like, oh my God, this was a complete whiff. It completely missed. And he had been playing the character for, 3 months before I got there, having done 6 or 7 episodes, and they were fine. They were good what he'd done. So I'm going to come in and say, no, this is completely wrong. This is who your character is. And so I said, I can't do that, especially to, an actor of this stature. So I had to think, what can I do? What note can I give him? And as I do when I approach actors, I have a chapter on this too, because giving notes to an actor is itself an art, because you don't want to destroy confidence. And it's important, I think, not just with a great actor like this, but any actor, if I'm going to adjust the performance, I like to convey to them that I saw what they were attempting to do, that I see that you had made this choice, and it's not like they're, inferior. It's just like, they have their own take. But what's important for me, I think, because I put myself in their position, also having acted myself, I know this is true. You want to feel seen for what you were trying, instead of just walking in and just ignoring everything they did and say, okay, forget all that, do it this way. You want to say, okay, I understand. I saw that you were trying to cajole this person, in order to kind of get your way that way. I see that. I'd like you to think about it maybe in a different way. I'd like you to try it maybe with a different intention. So that way the actor feels seen, B, doesn't feel spoken down to, and C, sees, okay, this is a process. This is let's see. So I said to Max, because he's a brilliant guy, and I realized I wasn't going to I didn't have to over talk it, but I just came up with a particular note. I said, in this story, you're telling him the dialogue had to do with him describing their history. And the dialogue started with him recounting how when they had first met, he personally had contempt for this guy. But over the years, that changed. And, he hopes things go well on this particular project he was looking in on to talk to the guy. And I simply said to him, I said, I'd like you to think of it a little differently. Perhaps, the contempt you describe having felt for him when you first met him, I'd like you to still have that same attitude. And he said, very well. And the meaning of that was, of course, it's like he could just as soon kill this guy as look at him. And he's toying with him. He's saying, when you first came here, I just thought you were an entitled aristocrat who looked down on people like me. He's saying like, yeah, I used to think that, and I still think that.
Yeah.
And the guy starts getting scared. He says, so I hope you figure out a way to do this thing I've asked you to do. With the implication now being, because if you don't, I've just told you how I really feel about you. And while things worked out for our mutual interest, I tolerated you. But if you fail me here, it's over for you. So it's like it suddenly became a deeply threatening, interesting scene. And okay, but I didn't say all that. All I said was, I'd like you to try it approaching the character at the beginning of the scene, feeling exactly what you still feel. When you describe what you used to feel, I'd like you to still feel it. And being a brilliant actor, he immediately got it. But all he said was, very well. He didn't say, great idea. Or he just said, okay, whatever. And we took the note well. And the next take is brilliant. He walks in, it's like there's just, oh my God, it's a live wire. This guy, and he was Max. And the scene was great. Okay, end of the day, okay, great, well. And I'm thinking, okay, I got the scene, which is my first need to do. And I have no idea what Max felt. I don't even know if he thought it was better. He said,
Okay.
okay, well, mine was better, but if you want me to do it that way, I'll do it. I didn't know what he felt. It was because he's not a touchy-feely, cuddly guy. It's like, yeah. So, okay. So a couple days later, I'm in, I had some laundry to do. I took it to throw it in the clothes washers at the laundry trailer where the costume department is. And the costume designer just comes up to me and says, "Hey, Dan, how are you?" I said, "Oh, good." She's, I just got to tell you, Max really enjoys working with you. And I said, "Oh, really?" Because I had no idea. And she said, "Yeah." He said, "You're the first director to give him a note."
Wow.
And I realized something very important about directing too, which is, you have to, no matter how excruciating it may feel, you don't want to get in an emotional ringer for doing something or fear and all that. You have to take responsibility for the storytelling. And obviously there were other directors who weren't willing to do that. And that's what I had confirmation on later. I heard that, people were saying, "I'm not going to tell him that act. I'm not going to give him a note." That's one director famously even said, "Oh, that's above my pay grade." That's so not true. It's exactly your pay grade. That is your job to be the interpreter of this story and to tell the story and to work with an actor to help move them to see it the way you're seeing it. It's not to say you shouldn't also be willing to be moved by how they see it if it helps. I mean, I've had that experience too with great actors. I mean, Claire Danes on Homeland, might completely revolutionize my whole way of seeing something. She'd come in and do something. I said, "Oh my God, that's so much better than what I thought you were going to do." But if it's not, you have to be able to change it, and again, how do I feel? If they did do something that makes me excited and it takes me deeper into the story, that's great. If they do something that makes me confused and distracted and derailed from the story, I can't say yes to it. And then a director has to develop a way of communicating that can bring the actor along. I mean, sometimes it's going to get to a point where you're going to just ask for what you want, but even if there's not agreement, that doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. But you have to take responsibility. You cannot abdicate if you're going to be a good director.
So even though Max nailed it after you gave him your notes, did you still give him, or were you able to have the time to give him a free take?
Oh, that's an interesting thing too. Yeah, you picked up on something I also wrote about. In that case, I didn't need to, because I think first of all, it was clear to me he nailed it. I've had other situations similar where I've been much more able to be communicative with an actor, say someone I know quite well, like Claire Danes or like Mandy Patinkin or like, whoever it might be. And sometimes there might be disagreement and they might say, "Okay, well, all right, I'll try to give you what you want. I'm not sure I can," or whatever. Or an actor that's not number one on the call sheet. That's what they call the lead of the show. Someone else who's just a kind of journeyman actor, but they're really trying to do well and they may not see it exactly as I do. And I'm trying to pull them together. And I know they really had preferred a different way. After I get what I want, I'll often say, and even when there's no conflict, even when we've just gotten through a difficult staging and a difficult scene that has some emotional currents that are difficult to hit, after I get what I want, I'll often just say to the actor, would you like one for free? And that's just means like, you know what? You don't have to please me anymore. I mean, you've been trying, I appreciate it. And you've done it. It's like we've worked together. You kind of came around to seeing it the way I'm kind of hoping it's seen. And they often, usually, frankly, like it. "Oh yeah, okay, that's better. I get it, all that." But they're trying to please me. And it's like by reassuring them, like, "I'm pleased, I'm happy. Now, don't worry about pleasing me. Now just go do it for free. Just see what happens." And because they've done this work, it's more in their body. And because they know it doesn't have to be perfect because they've already got it, a surprising number of those takes turn out to be the best one, where they're just freer. You can just feel their whole essence sometimes just relaxing. They're coming in. I just know, oh my goodness, they're really connecting to the scene partner. They're really into this moment. Because they're not worried about, is this right? Did I do it? Did I hit that thing that I was supposed to and all that? They don't have to worry about that. And often, especially with talented actors, it's in them in a way, and the deeper resources get activated and they let go to those. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
So when you have this free take alongside the takes that you want and you're happy with, how does that help the basic grammar of film editing afterwards in that process?
Well, okay. I mean, I say free, but they can't suddenly do a whole different blocking. And instead of picking up the class with their right hand, do it with their left hand. Yeah. And, it's like, I have to be able to cut it into the other things, they know that. They're not going to suddenly, and it can't be so wildly different that, the master doesn't work now and everything, it's within parameters. Yeah. Right.
And lastly, what made you write this book? What happened that made you think now's the time?
Thank you for the question. Yeah. I started mentoring young directors about, 8 or 9 years ago. I got to a point where I realized I had gone to film school, and I realized, there's so much you don't learn in film school. I had made a thesis film in film school. That was great. It got me my first job and all that. But the process of making a student film, or nowadays, the process I hope many of your listeners who aspire to direct, are doing themselves, taking their iPhones and just kind of doing stuff without a deadline, without, as long as you want to edit it together and your friends on the crew and all that stuff. It's so different when you come on particularly a series television set. A feature is interesting because in some ways you have so much more support, because there's generally not the time urgency. There's much longer period to prep. If you make a mistake in the filming, you can reshoot, you can tack on stuff at the end of the schedule. It's easier than in some ways, than when you get it in a situation where, okay, 7 days prep, 8 days shoot, you're not going to get the script until the day before you start, go, and you get it right, and it's like, it's very challenging. It's also why it's hard to break into series television, because producers know, there's no time for training wheels. You got to come in and do it. You can't do a little of it and then someone else takes over. So it's a challenge. And I realized, there's certain things you just don't learn in film school. And I would like to, and at that time, also what motivated it was, over the years I've had, a lot of young directors ask if they could shadow me in a job just to watch my process. And I'm generally open to that. If not to everyone, I vet them in some ways, but if I like them and I think they're talented, I say, yeah. And I've had varying kind of experiences in terms of being impressed with them as potential filmmakers. But I hit a point where I had a third or fourth person that felt like, this person I really think has talent, and also they all hit a certain kind of demographic in that they were women and men both, but they were all kind of just shy of 30, and they had all made which told me they're serious, because they had been at this, they had stayed with it for whatever it has been, 4 or 5 or 6 years, trying to develop themselves as filmmakers and making short films and all that. Plus they had all made at least one short film that impressed me, is they have something to say.
Excellent.
They're a storytelling instance. So I liked them. That was the other thing. So I had like 4 young people that I thought, I want to help them. And so I said, let's form a mentoring group, and we'll meet like once a month, and I'll come up with exercises. And the things you don't learn in film school. Like, so for one of them, for example, I remember I was directing the show House in London, in England. I think they call it Dr. House, with Hugh Laurie, which was a great show and very popular at the time. And they all knew it. And I was directing it. And I asked the producers, would you be okay if I bring some mentees of mine on the weekend? Can we get keys to the soundstage? And they said, yeah, fine. So we'd meet on the set of the hospital set of House. And I'd say to these 4 young people, I said, look, let's pretend Friday, you're given the call sheet for Monday. There's these 4 scenes, and I gave them the script. I'd given them the script in advance. I said, look, pick a scene that takes place in one of these offices, or whatever, with Hugh Laurie and with whatever, and take a couple hours. I'm just going to read a book here. You guys go, take a couple hours, figure out a staging. Because when you come in Monday, and this is something they don't teach you in film school, when you come in Monday, the first thing that's going to happen before anything else happens. Okay, rehearsal, you have 15 minutes, roughly. If you go past 15 minutes, you're jeopardizing. It can seep over. It can be a little longer. Maybe it's a half hour. That's a real long rehearsal. I'm not talking about the most emotional scene in the story that's 5 pages with 12 actors. I mean, you need more time for that. But you don't have much time. So you have to have a whole staging in mind that tells the story, that comes out of your deep understanding of why this scene is here. What is the storytelling onus at this moment? And it's like, and not so. What's the staging that's going to help the actors? What's a physicalizing that would portray the inner conflict? One way of thinking of staging is, if you turn down the sound and you watched behavior, would you understand what the scene is about? That's a good way to think about staging, I think. Is it embodied? And so figure out a staging, and then not only that, figure out camera angles. And, okay, that's the staging you want. Now, okay, screen direction, the line, you don't want to cross it. You want to cross, cover that character is whichever side of the camera you have them on, the other one has to be looking the opposite way, left to right or right to left, and they move around, and you have to say, how many shots do you need? Figure that out too. And let's talk about it in a couple hours. So they'd each pick a scene, and then we'd sit and they'd tell me their staging, and it would be a little kind of Socratic. And I say, okay, and why'd you do that? And what's the scene about? And the way I have to ask myself, and what's the key moment of the scene, and what shifts, and why does this dialogue here? What's underneath that? Why does that question? Why does that occur to that character to ask that question at that moment? What happened before it that question was the right answer? Or what's happened in that character's inner life that would be the thing he or she thought to ask at that moment? You have to have answers for these, because an actor may not. And if they're just saying a line and you just read, well, they're saying the line because it's their turn to speak. I got to give them an understanding of why they're saying the line, that makes it compelling for the audience. So that kind of Socratic thing. And then we'll say, okay, now where are you putting the camera? And they'll describe the thing. And, for a young filmmaker, I say, okay, so it's a 2-character scene. It's 3 pages. And the way you've just described it, you had 17 shots to cover the scene. That we don't have time for that. You've got 5 scenes to do this day. You don't have time for 17 shots can we consolidate? Is the staging a problem? Is it too elaborate? Can it be made a little more simple and still, work? And then I say, okay. And then he say, now how can you combine shots? And then we'll talk about it. I said, well, if an actor crossed at this point, wouldn't that take the camera over to see the door behind that character, so that the entrance, so that other characters coming in, you're already set for? You don't need a whole separate angle. Oh yeah, that's good. So these are the kind of things that they don't really teach in film school, in my experience. And I also would go to acting workshops where I sometimes guest teach, and I asked them to, work with actors, and we could talk to the actors. How did you feel about what was said? That kind of thing. So I had a great time doing that. And each of these people has now really done well. I'm really happy to report. And then moreover, I was approached, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. And this didn't persist. I did this for a couple of years, but, and I've kept in touch with them, and I consult with them whenever they need me to. And then another young woman approached me about 5 years ago. She was in one of these diversity programs that the studios are trying to get more women and people of color and other nationalities into the directing ranks. It's been very successful, as we all know, but 5 years ago it was just starting out, and as a concern. And she was in one of these programs, and she approached me. I was directing The Americans, and she said, that's my favorite show. I wonder if I could shadow you. And I said, I met with her, and she again checked all those same boxes. Talented filmmaker, right around age 30. And it's funny how that works. So she shadowed me on The Americans, and I thought she was great. And she had actually made a feyour film in Ireland. She wasn't Irish. She's actually from San Francisco, but she lived in Ireland. She made a beautiful short film called Run and Jump. I recommend it to your audience. And right. Lovely film. So I knew she was really good. And so she shadowed me. And then, I don't know, 6 months later, I called her up. I said, Steph, what's going on? I mean, you must be directing now, right? I mean, after she shadowed me and I saw the show, I said, she said, oh, well, I'm in another studio run program trying to shadow other people. And my heart just sank, because you don't get hired because you shadowed somebody. I mean, just put yourself in the position of the producers of the show, that you watched Dan direct, and that means you're supposed to be now ready to take over. Why? I don't know why that would be. So, and my heart sank because I said, why isn't your agent doing anything? And I realized, it makes sense in a certain way because it's so hard to get all the decisions right when you don't have any. I kind of get it. So what ultimately happened is I called the producers, the Americans. They had told me they need to find, they were just very open about it. We need to hire a woman. So I said, well, how about Steph? You met her last season. She shadowed me. She's great. She's made a great film. Why don't you? And they said, has she ever directed television? And I said, well, no. But they said, oh, well, we'll never get her approved. And it was just like end of discussion. And so I just, something just clicked in me. I just said, you know what? If you hire her, I will be with her the entire time of her prep and shoot. She'll still be the director. I'll just be a backstop for her. And I'll guarantee you there's not going to be cost overruns and every story point will be delivered, but she deserves a shot. And then I added at the moment, just impulsively, and you don't have to pay me.
Wow.
So they said, oh my God, you do that. And I said, yeah, because I believed in her. And it wasn't, it was, I kind of
good on you.
Forward. I'm happy I did it. But I really regard it as a great pleasure to do it. I love teaching and it worked out in my schedule. I could manage it. So they said yes. She did the show and her career has taken off because once she had the credit, then other people could hire her. And now she was nominated for an Emmy for The Watchmen. She's doing Mandalorian. She shot Billions. She got called back on The Americans. I mean, she's doing great. So that's very fulfilling. So I loved this process of teaching and kind of and I had to learn to communicate all these things. I spent a lot of time deconstructing my process because a lot of it was just intuitive and instinctive. But wait, how do I work? I ask a lot of questions of myself. Oh yeah, that's what I do. So I had to break that down to communicate. And that was when I realized, maybe I could write a book about this, which is what I feel my book is. I'm really trying to share with the reader. It's like so I don't mentor individually. I'd like to mentor, just share how I approach the work and what. So to me, I hope the book is compelling, not just to aspiring directors, because I try to take the reader inside the experience of making a show and what your creative challenges are and how you learn to ask yourself what's important and all that kind of stuff. So that's what led to the book.
Excellent. I'm glad. That's such a great story. I love that. I really do. I'm definitely going to check out some of her work now. That's for certain.
Thank you.
I really love that. So Dan, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it. And a lot of the listeners are going to love this. I know that much. That's for sure. As much as I did.
Have you thought of upgrading your cinematography game? Would you like to have an ASC cinematographer mentor you for free? Join veteran cinematographer Suki Medenzovic, ASC, Disney, Pixar, FX Networks, Netflix, American Horror Story. As he teaches you how to create beautiful images using 3 lighting techniques he has mastered on film sets over his 30-plus years in the film industry. Each technique uses basic, low-cost lighting equipment so that anyone can achieve beautiful visuals no matter your project's budget. If you want to take your cinematography to the next level, visit filmmakingconversations.com to sign up for instant access. If you like this podcast, share it with friends. Leave a comment in the comments section and hit the subscribe button.